Good morning, and thank you all for joining us today. A few guidelines in front of you. You might see that you've got a rule book, a handout. I've got a few presenters here with me today. Give us a little bit of your patience as we transition between speakers, going through the slideshow. And with that, I'll go ahead and introduce ourselves. My name is Tim Moss. I'm the Forest Practices Act Field Coordinator for the northern half of Oregon, and I'll kick it off to our presenters.
Thank you. My name's John Krause. I'm a stewardship forester in Columbia County.
Dave Thompson. I'm a stewardship forester out of Polk County, Dallas office.
Mike Thompson, stewardship forester. I'm Lawley unit. I got northern Clackamas County and east Multnomah County. This morning.
Good morning. I'm Arden Gwynn. I'm the FRIA coordinator, Forest Road Inventory Assessment coordinator.
So today we're going to be focusing on the new rules and specifically the streams and roads portion of the recently adopted Forest Practices Act rule set. All right, so what the new rules will do. We've got added protection for fish and amphibian habitats. And Oregon Department of Forestry's role in all of this was to take the PFA and draft rules for the Board of Forestry to consider, coming from the PFA document that was passed. Okay. Oh, there we go. We've got increased stream buffers and added protections for water quality. We've got requirement for new design standards for forest roads. We've got requirement for more trees retained on steep slopes, and that is separate from the previous public safety rules that we had for steep slopes. We've got increased compliance monitoring. We created a mitigation program, an adaptive management program. Small forest land owner office, that is a new office within the Oregon Department of Forestry. We've provided training, required training, and training that we decided was going to be helpful for foresters and operators. And also additional program support. All right. So one really important section, I would say increasingly valuable portion of the new rules would be the definitions. There's been a lot of new terms that have been added to the FPA. A few of these here are area of inquiry, RH max, flow feature, DSSAs, a lot of acronyms, so designated sediment source areas. And so it's just really important to pay attention to this definition section. And it's one of the first places I go these days when I'm looking at the rules is see if there's a new definition in Division 600 before I continue on. All right, so for the first section of the day, just going to go over small forest landowners, so the SFOs. I'm going to be brief here. We're going to be going over this more in depth when we get to the minimum option for the stream section, the road section, and the steep slopes. And this was developed because given the inherent differences between small forest landowners, or SFOs, and large industrial landowners, the Private Forest Accord framework envisions some different standards and strategies for SFOs compared to large landowners. So to be qualified as an SFO, small forest landowner, you need to own less than 5,000 acres of forest land in Oregon and have harvested no more than an average of 2 million board feet annually when averaged over 3 years. And that 3 years average is calculated on the date that the department receives a notification, or if you're applying for the Small Forest Land Investment in Stream Habitat Program, or otherwise known as SFISH, then the date that the landowner submits that grant application would be the start of that 3 years. The small forest landowner also needs to affirm that they do not expect to exceed an average of that yearly volume of 2 million board feet over the next 10 years. Some of the new SFO programs include the Road Condition Assessment, otherwise known as the RCA, the Small Forest Land Investment in Stream Habitat, SFISH, Forest Conservation Tax Credit, FCTC, and modified riparian management area buffers within the stream rules. And again, these will be covered in more detail later in the presentation. I believe they're in the stream section. All right, so throughout the state, we've got 12 additional foresters designated as SFO foresters throughout the districts, and they're here to help explain the new rules and programs and to assist with notifications of operations and specifically help with RCAs. You can contact your local district and stewardship foresters if needed to find out how they're using their SFOs. They're all a little different throughout the state. If you notice in your handout, you do have a forester list and map QR code, and that navigation will take you to the website, to the page showing Find a Forester. And that's if you want to find one for your area. All right, I'm going to hop off and hand it over to our next presenter, talk about streams. Thanks.
So with the stream section, we go with, one of the key elements with the private forest accord agreement and changes to the FPA. A lot of those involve updates to the water protection rules. The main objectives were to develop a stream network depicting fish use, distribution, and flow duration for the entire state. They also simplified the geographic regions for administration of the riparian rural prescriptions. So, we went from 7 geographic areas down to 2, west side and east side, and they want to ensure a balance of, economic and ecological needs for landowners, while, of course, recognizing the important benefits and functions of riparian areas. And they also want to provide, management options for small forest landowners. So, many of you guys are already probably aware that as of July 1st in 2023 this year, the new stream rules, new fish stream buffers went into effect for large landowners. And, those large landowners that submitted notifications after July 1st. But come January 1st, 2024, new rules are in effect for all landowners. So with the Division 635, the water classification rules, the following changes were made. The stream classification process for determining fish use now formally recognizes the use of fish distribution model, as well as information from historic and ongoing field surveys. To help us implement these changes, we hired a contractor who's using a LiDAR-based, high-resolution LiDAR-based stream network. They're working the stream network to incorporate the fish model and determine perennial stream information to provide comprehensive classification information. The revisions also simplify the state into the 2 geographic regions. Division 635 also recognizes and requires ODF increased coordination with Department of Fish and Wildlife. With the private forest accord funds that we got, we were able to hire some more ODF and W biologists, but there's going to be more work working together with those fish bios, and they can come out and help with the perenniality determination protocols and assess your streams for fish use. So that's a good thing. With the type N streams, we're looking at the perennial flow now. We're going to be going through phase 1 of this process. There's going to be multiple phases. So the flow permanence protocol is the idea of phase 1, where these streams are going to be identified as or defined as perennial or seasonal, and they'll be completed using field identification methods during the harvest planning. This step is required regardless of what you see on the new streams layer. Right now, some of you may know that that new layer is available, and it will note streams that are perennial or seasonal. And unfortunately, those streams, they're sort of, they're perennial. They need to be assumed perennial until field survey is done and determined that they are seasonal. So they're kind of, you know, innocent until proven guilty, right? So once phase 2 is implemented, they're going to go through a process where the stream perenniality will be identified with that comprehensive model, you know, and known as the modeled end. And so this model will rely on that high resolution LiDAR data that they have, and, you know, take into account the prior field observations that have been done, and, you know, any other survey information. And you know, the forest practices technical guidance on these field protocols should be out soon. ODF&W is working on that to get that out to folks. And then we will go to, let's see here, phase 2. Then we go to the final phase where, you know, there may be some adaptive management to consider, you know, changing climate for updating stream flow permanence based off of input from the Adaptive Management Committee. And so here you see the, this is a view of the, from our ODF webpage. It's got a view of the new stream model. You know, they look a little different from the old streams that are all dotted and whatnot. And, you know, all the yellow streams there, those are the type ends, and note that here the permanence is noted as perennial, but again, you know, those streams are perennial until, you know, surveyed, and then you can make that determination that they are seasonal. And, you know, you guys can find this. I don't know if any of you guys are aware, if you go to the ODF webpage, you know, with the private forest accord, go into in the hot topic section, you can hit that link and you can see the steep slopes viewer, which also has our new stream layer. And I would suggest any consultants or professional foresters out there update your stream layers and download those to your GIS projects, just so you have that updated info. So, you know, with the perennial flow field surveys, you know, what we talked about in the definition is that area of inquiry. So any of these streams that, these type N streams, you need to go and take a look at them. That first 250 feet is your area of inquiry, where you're looking for what we call flow features. You know, flowing water, yeah, obviously has to be in a channel and not any of the overland flow or whatnot, but it needs to be a flow feature, which is flowing water for 25 feet or more. And, you know, that will determine, that will be your flow feature, which will determine if that stream is perennial or not. Now, this graphic, there's a lot of stuff on here you guys probably may have seen, or we haven't quite gone over yet, but you're looking at, you know, there's a SSBT stream here. I guess I should point both ways. And, you know, with the SSBT stream, you have that RH max, which is your full distance of what, you know, you may need to provide protection to, and it goes up to, you know, with the SSBT stream, that type N, that RH max goes up 1,150 feet. And here with the standard practice, you got the RMA of 75 feet for a distance of 500 feet. And then the additional 650 feet to hit that RH max is going to be a 50-foot RMA. And then with the one on the left here, you have what we call our RELZs, so our equipment limitation zones. That one extends up to that flow feature, the F there. That's where there was flowing water for at least 25 feet. And so that RELZ extended up to that point. And, you know, the minimum option for small landowners, that RMA, you'll see there's a difference in size, whereas standard option is 75 foot. Minimum option, it's going to be 35 feet. And that 35 feet goes up for a full distance of 600. Well, actually with this, sorry, SSBT, so it's 1150. We'll go into this more. Now, this graphic, just shows the practice where water's tight bend is flowing into a fish stream, so not SSBT, where that RH max is a distance of 600 feet. And this graphic's a little goofy. We noticed the other day that where it's marked as a flow feature, that's actually kind of incorrect. That should be down in that green area where the RMA is, but it is another spot of flowing water, but it's not at least 25 feet. But if you do come within one of these points that's within your RH max, where you find flowing water in there, not for 25 feet, not a full 25 feet, you still will need to provide a little bit of buffer if that's within that RH max. If it's further up past the 600 feet, you don't need to provide that additional protection. So riparian areas. Division 643, the rules with providing your riparian areas, that we all know, the idea behind these is to provide, the desired future condition where we're looking at providing shade, large wood recruitment, woody debris for, that channel, keeping those, all that material there. And, those structures that, trees provide and vegetation provide, that, enhance water quality and can influence the stream. So as we said, we've taken the state, which used to have 7 of those georegions. We brought it down to 2, west side and east side, where, on the Western Oregon, these RMA buffers are no touch. So you're staying outside of them. And the east side, if any of y'all work out in Eastern Oregon, you got a 30-foot no touch buffer, but then they have areas where you can do some management in there where they're still using basal area. The rules with the rules do provide options for small landowners. Small landowners have the option of using the standard practice, and they can also go with what we call the minimum option, which is more based off of the standard buffers that we have now, but again, they're no touch. There is also the option of the tax credit, where landowners can, even though the minimum option is available to them, they can decide to leave that wood and are available to get a tax credit for the stumpage of the timber that they're leaving in that. And they have made, special considerations for significantly disproportionately impacted folks. It's just funny the way they worded that. But anyhow, so basically folks who are heavily impacted by streams, and this is going to be pretty rare if they have streams that are going all over the place on their property and it's taken up, they're going to have quite a hit by these new buffers. They may be able to, there's going to be some special considerations for those. So here we have the standard practice for the riparian buffers. I don't like this side of the room better than this side. That one's closer. But so with your large streams, you're looking at 110-foot, buffer, medium 110, and small 100 foot. Again, this is the standard practice. Your large and medium type ends, you have those sometimes. It's a 75-foot no-touch buffer. And then we'll go into the small streams, the NPs. Those are the non-fish perennials. Where that buffer, especially with SSBT, it goes 75, but then for that 500 foot, and then it drops down to 50. And then your NPs to fish, into a fish, that's a 75-foot buffer and whatnot. But basically, I think they're just trying to show, what your buffer is going to look like, sort of. With the harvest units, and you got your large and your SSBT 110, medium 110, small 100. So Eastern Oregon, as I said, won't really go into this much, but they have that 30-foot no-cut buffer, but then they have these outer buffers where you can do some management in there and remove some basal area. And so just, some different options there. And then, it looks like on their type ends, they have a 30-foot RMA buffer on those. What we're going to talk about here is, kind of with the small non-fish streams. Somebody called them Nancy streams the other day, the type ends. We're going to talk about, kind of the tree retention, the flow features, the ELZs, and, the stream classification. So here, you got in Western Oregon, you got your small type N perennial that's flowing into a fish stream. You got that RH max of 600 feet. And you're going to have a 75-foot buffer there. Right here, you see the RH max is up there in the yellow, but they found the end of flow feature. The last flow feature they found, flow of 25 feet, was right down there midway, and they went ahead and rounded that off, and they ended their RMA buffer there, and then they had their ELZ, which is equipment limitation zone, and we'll go over that a little bit later. Right here, going into the SSBT stream, we kind of looked at this before. You got your 75-foot buffer that extends out for that 500-foot distance, but then after 500 feet, you got to leave 50-foot buffer, and then they hit the your RH max right here, but you'll see, I keep pointing here, but I should be pointing up here. You'll see that the flow feature extends further up from that 1,150 foot RH max, and that's where what we're going to have called the RELZ. It's not confusing enough, all these acronyms, but the RELZ, basically, it's an equipment limitation zone, but you're going to have to retain, your non-merch, your 6-inch diameter and under trees and vegetation. And then, so, basically looking at the differences, there's differences in the RH max between your type F and your SSBT streams. And your tree retention is shorter of the RH max, or the furthest upstream flow feature. So, there's also a deal with the, if you hit your RH max and then there's a flow feature further up the stream, you can square that RMA buffer off. But if that flow feature ends within the RH max, you round that buffer off there in the flow feature, and then continue on for part of the rules. So one thing that didn't change a whole lot are the alternate vegetation prescriptions. I know in my district we dealt a lot with this with prescription 1 for dealing with the wildfires and salvage. So prescription 1 dealing with the salvage for catastrophic events. That could be wildfire, but it can also be insect and disease damage or wind damage or something, anything that, you want to go in there and manage in order to produce that desired future condition, rehab that buffer, get some conifer established in there. Prescription 2 with the hardwood conversion blocks, that has also been retained, but they have done a little bit of work and revised the basal area tables on those. I think your active management target has gone up a little bit for basal area, but those options are still there for going in the buffer, so you're not completely locked out of the buffer like folks were thinking. So there are options to work in there. And here's just what I talked about. But you will have to do a written plan to get in there as usual. You can have written plans for a whole lot of stuff, but we'll work you through that. They did also retain the ability for site-specific prescriptions. These will require a PFAP or a plan for alternate practice, where you may be able to, if there's a need to go in there and improve the health of that buffer or RMA, you can, through filing a plan for alternate practice, go in there as long as you're meeting the goals of the vegetation retention goals and whatnot, and trying to provide that, desired future condition. So if you're going in there and truly wanting to rehabilitate and establish that buffer in a better condition overall, we can do that through a plan for alternate practice, which will be approved by your forester. So seeps and springs. So this kind of reminds me of like the stream-associated wetlands and whatnot, if they're extended out from the RMA buffer. But these seeps and springs that are right along the edge of the RMA buffer, if they're right there, in there, you will have to kind of buffer those a little bit. Standard practice is 35 feet around those seeps and springs. But small forest landowners, it's going to be 15 feet. Now, seeps and springs that are way outside the RMA and out in the unit, those are just going to be treated as your, small other wetlands, your other wetlands where there's no need for an RMA buffer or whatnot. You just got to keep equipment out of them, as you always should. So the ELZs, equipment limitation zones, fun. So these are dependent on the uppermost flow feature and the RH max, on the type N streams. The difference is really, the RELZ is going to be, you're going to be retaining trees 6-inch in diameter and under, and your understory shrubs. ELZs, that's basically just limiting equipment disturbance in that area, but there's no tree and shrub retention requirements. And basically these are, to, protect soil quality, minimize disturbance, and, reduce any chances of delivery of sediment. So, the ELZ distances from west side and east side a little different by 5 feet. Western Oregon, it's 35-foot ELZ or RELZ, and east side it's 30-foot. And this is kind of a goofy picture because it's not a very good example of a stream. Yeah, so basically the idea here is, well, yeah, there's the stream right there. Yeah, all right, nice. The idea here is that, you just need to do what you can to, from during the operation, keeping, equipment out of there, exposing the amount of soil that's displaced in those areas, any chance that you're altering the drainage patterns within those areas. And, any areas that there's potential soil disturbance where it has potential for it to deliver. Those are things that, we're going to want to minimize because there are certain thresholds there. And if you exceed those thresholds, there could be a need for corrective actions. So these thresholds are, they're different for cable yarding versus ground-based operations. So the threshold for cable yarding is 20% disturbance. So any more than that 20% disturbance, and you might need to do some of these sort of mitigation or corrective action factors. With ground-based, that threshold is 10%. So do what you can to keep the equipment out of there. So these corrective actions, they can be water bars or grass seeding, log and slash if it's appropriately placed, mulching, and down log placement. Anything you can to prevent any sort of runoff from those areas from machine tracks and equipment use. You want anything you can to prevent any chance of delivery to those streams. And this just kind of shows the example of the ELZs and RELZs. So with this one, because you hit that RH max on the stream, on the SSBT stream, you hit that 1,150-foot RH max. But you see, here's a flow feature that's up there. So that stream's still flowing, but you already did your job. You hit that max. You're going to have to provide that RELZ up to that last flow feature. You know, and then once you hit that flow feature, it's just an ELZ. And with this one, you know, type F, your RH max is only 600 foot. So right here, the flow feature was hit, and you rounded off that buffer. But you know, your RH max is in there, but it's just an ELZ from there on. Once you hit that end of flow, that last flow feature, your ELZ up to the end of the channel. I guess that's something I didn't probably mention earlier is those ELZs need to go up to the end of the channel. So, small forest landowner options, the SFO minimum options. So these are based off the existing RMA buffers that we have now. You know, your 50, your 70, and your 100 foot. And basically, but they're no cut buffers again. But if you're a small forest landowner, you're under 5,000 acres, you're not planning on harvesting more than 2 million board feet in the next 2 years, these minimum options are available to you. But, you know, this minimum option at some point will be capped once they've hit 5% of the available stream miles within a fifth field watershed. And finally, we have a picture of what that is, because I've been scratching my head trying to figure that one out for a while. But, you know, this minimum option could be capped once we hit that point of 5% available stream miles in there. And there are other options if we hit that cap and the minimum option is not available to folks. And I had a thought, but I just lost it. But, you know, this is one where I think a lot of folks, especially small landowners, are really interested in these options. So with the fifth field watershed, this is sort of what one looks like. You know, it's a bigger area than I thought it might be. But, you know, with small forest landowners, they are going to be required to report at the end of your harvest. Once you're done harvesting, they need to report back to, I believe, the SFO forester or to Salem somehow. They're going to need to report the number, you know, how many feet a stream buffer they managed under that minimum option. And so those distances get reported at the end of the operation. That gets sent into our Salem office, our headquarters office, and there's people there that are all calculating that stuff, putting it in the maps and figuring out, you know, how many stream miles within that fifth field watershed have been harvested. And you know, once we hit that cap, then they're going to kind of shut her down on the minimum option being available. My guess is it's going to take us a few years to get there, hopefully. Now, there is the other option, is if the minimum option is not available, those smaller buffers, landowners can apply for this tax credit for timber that they're losing between that, in that area, between the standard practice. So take a small fish stream, right? Standard practice is 100 foot, but with the minimum option, you could cut down to 50. If that's not available for you, you can apply for this tax credit for the lost volume in that area. Here's kind of a picture of that. It's kind of goofy, not quite to scale, but you know, you got your minimum option is that red line there. And then you have your standard practice is the yellow line. So that strip of timber in there, so they're calling a conservation area, you can get, you know, a tax credit for the stumpage value of the timber that's in there. And, you know, this is something that, you know, will need to be calculated by a professional forester. We'll need to go in there and kind of cruise that timber and give you, you know, a value of that, and then, you know, base that off the harvest costs and get you your stumpage value, and then, you know, the landowner can put that in and get that tax credit. Now, this, you know, tax credit is the idea is that it's going to be to offset your your income tax liability, and it's kind of a lump sum that you can get it as a lump sum, or it can be used over multiple consecutive tax years. I guess it is transferable to your heirs, but it's not transferable to a new landowner if the property's sold. So a new landowner is going to need to follow this harvest restriction or repay the amount of original tax credit plus interest from the date of transfer of land. So it's not something I know a whole heck of a lot about, but you can contact your new SFO forester, wherever they may be, and they can tell you more about that. We did, I think it was mentioned, but we did bring on some new foresters out there, a little bit of field capacity added, the SFO foresters from the SFO office. So each district got at least one of them. And they're going to be available to help small landowners with, either tax credit program or some of these other programs out there, and hopefully help them with, taking a look at some of the streams on their property. So the significantly disproportionately impacted folks, this is going to be, special case situation where if a parcel has a dwelling on it and is at least 10 acres in size, and these new RMA buffers, total encumbrance of the RMA buffers is greater than 20% of their forest land acreage, they can. There's some special considerations in there for these folks, and it's going to be kind of extraordinary cases, and they will probably. It says in here they will be exempt from the small forest landowner cap. So if we hit that 5% and the minimum option is not available, these folks, because they're disproportionately impacted, will be able to use that minimum option at that point. And, they'll also, be allowed to count all the trees in the riparian area towards wildlife tree requirements. Steep slopes, that's not me, so thank you.
So we're going to be talking about steep slopes. Please remember that there is a more extensive training that has been and will be offered concerning this subject for the steep slopes rules under Division 630. For that reason, today will be more of an overview. And if you're interested in and have not taken that training, please know that more will be coming out. And as those dates get as those dates get scheduled, we will release that. So who in here has taken that steep slope certification course? Perfect. Looks like at least half of us. So for some of us, this will be new. And for some of us, we've already seen this as it was pulled from that training. I'm just going to open up these guys. So there's some new purposes in the harvest rules under Division 630. The current purpose statement does acknowledge the importance of timber harvest in forest management, and that there's always going to be some form of temporary environmental disturbance. Also, that the standards of the harvest rules to maintain forest land productivity, minimize impacts to water quality, and protect wildlife and fish habitats, along with some new purpose statements added. 3 of the 8 are listed up here on the slides. And those are to reduce the potential for sediment delivery to waters of the state, retain trees in designated areas, and still using Division 623 rules for landslides and public safety. Oops. All right, so with that, we've also got the slopes model, which is designed designated areas to deliver materials for fish use stream habitats and provide non-fish stream habitats for covered species. Here are a few of the acronyms that show up in this division. I'll explain them a little bit here and then again on the next page. So we've got the DDFTAs, designated debris flow traversal areas. Those show up on the model as red and orange lines. Then you've got your DSSAs, designated sediment source areas, which show up as the red or blue polygons. And then those DSSAs can become SRAs once chosen. So then those are the slope retention areas, leave areas, head walls. These are the red or blue polygons that show up on the model, which, like I said, is a subset of the polygon selection for the retention areas. All right, so here's an example of what you might see on the model. This first line in red is the designated debris flow traversal area. And then you've got a designated sediment source area, a DSSA, with a trigger source. That's why it's in red. And then a blue, which is an area with DSSA without trigger sources in it. So as denoted in the rule 2, I might mention that these rules in 630 for steep slopes do only apply to Western Oregon, not Eastern Oregon. And also keep in mind that the slopes model is a complicated mathematical and geographic representation that provides simple answers to areas with harvest limitations, taking something fairly complicated in the field and on the model and putting it on a map. So this will show up on department maps and those that are in ferns when you go to notify. Just kind of going through some of the terms again. So the traversal in the traversal areas means the travel path or transport zone. I mentioned that the red polygons are the ones that contain trigger sources, and this means areas within designated sediment source areas that the slopes model has identified as most likely to trigger a high volume debris flow. These areas will have a 20% probability of triggering a top 33% high volume debris flow. And then into the SRAs, the slope retention areas, that means that we need to choose 50% at a minimum of these DSSAs for our slope retention areas, the SRAs. And these will be left unharvested after designated as SRAs. All right. So designated sediment source areas, some more information on those. Again, the model identifies these areas, and they are the areas that are most likely to experience landslides that initiate debris flows. And these debris flows will likely deliver to fish use streams, and some may or may not contain trigger sources. The slope model identifies the hill slope areas greater than a quarter acre in size, and the rule definition provides some more information on how these slope models were identified in these areas. Like I said at the beginning of today, there's a lot of really good information in the definitions. I would say more information than was before. A lot of these terms you'll find defined there rather than in the division that the rule is in. So slopes model also identifies areas, lost it. Okay, so two key items to note on these designated areas are that yarding corridors may be cut, but the trees need to remain on the ground, and that's through the DSSAs without a trigger source. With a DSSA with a trigger source, no yarding corridors are to be cut. If any of these steep slopes requirements are within the unit, then a non-statutory, non-waivable written plan is required. And this means that the requirement for the written plan cannot be waived, as was the case with other non-stats before. You could waive the requirement to even have them. Now there's a new category of non-statutory, non-waivable. So going into a little bit of how we pick these. As mentioned before, you need to pick 50% of the designated sediment source areas that are within the harvest unit for the SRAs. There needs to be, you have to go through the certified training, as mentioned, in order to field identify the head walls by a landowner representative. The way that the selection priorities and modifications occur is that you need to choose the DSSA areas with trigger sources over those without trigger sources. So if you only had two, one with trigger sources and one without, you would need to pick the red with the trigger sources. And then also the large polygons over the smaller ones. So these priorities may be modified for worker safety or environmental impact, such as if you needed to build miles and miles of road to get around one, since you can't yard through it in the case that your yarder might be above a red. So there is some safety modifications you can make for the selection of the SRAs. So moving on to the designated debris flow traversal areas, the DDFTAs. This is also identified on the slope model. Leaf trees are required along the type N streams in the length of the DDFTAs. Trees need to be retained for 25 feet on either side of these, and that is 25 feet on either side of the active channel or center of the draw if a channel is not present within these. Cable yarding corridors are allowed through these, but again, no removal of trees. And same as with the other portions of the steep slopes rules, if these show up in your harvest unit, a written plan is required. All right, so there is also an SFO minimum option with the steep slopes rules. So they do not need to follow the designated sediment source areas / the SRAs, but they still do have the requirement for the DDFTAs, the designated debris flow traversal areas. They need to retain 50% of the length of the DDFTAs that show up in their unit. And ODF will be assisting the SFOs with determining which 50% of that length that is. And the RMA, as we'll get into in a minute, will still encompass the stream adjacent failure. So the SFOs still need to follow the DDFTAs and stream adjacent failures, but not the designated sediment source areas and the slope retention areas. So same as with the large landowners, cable yarding corridors are allowed, still need to leave the trees, written plan required. How many in here have possibly laid out units with these new steep slopes rules? Got a couple? Okay. It's good to see, obviously, be more prevalent here coming after January 1st. All right, so we also have stream adjacent failure rules that have been added, and these are for actively failing or unstable slopes. Areas will be located upslope of the RMAs, the riparian management areas of a fish stream. These stream adjacent failures are located on slopes greater than 70%, and they are field identified areas next to fish streams that are actively failing. Leave trees will be required upslope of the RMAs of fish streams that have these stream adjacent failures. So for industrial landowners, they need to keep the lesser of 170 feet from the fish stream or to the slope break that's greater than 20%. So the lesser of the 170 feet or greater than 20% slope break. For small forest landowners, they need to keep the lesser of 30 feet beyond the fish stream or up to that greater than 20% slope break, again, the lesser of the two. So significant difference there for SFOs.
The roads division is organized into subjects such as location, design, and maintenance. The plan here today is to touch on each one, where I will be describing the rules as they will be when they go into effect. Written plans will be discussed at the end. Just as an example, 625-0200 is the road location section. In the context of this rule, road location means where on the landscape the road is situated. The main points in this section are critical locations and minimizing road construction. And just so you know, I've got notes written down on these slides, so I'm not going to be reading the slides word for word. If you got questions, please write them down on the card and we can address them at the end. So this slide is a brief summary of what has changed in the roads division. Essentially, the purpose remains unchanged, but what has changed is the level of specificity surrounding how we go about accomplishing that purpose. A very inexact comparison of the length of the current rules to the new rules shows that the division is about 4.5 times longer than they currently are, and nearly all the added length is in added specifics. So critical road locations. Tech Note 7 defines 9 critical locations that fall into the categories listed. There is some overlap and/or redundancy in some cases, but for the most part, the definitions were moved directly from guidance. Guidance will be developed that will assist foresters and landowners in identifying these areas. The key with road construction on critical locations is that it must be avoided when there are other suitable options. The criteria listed here are those that the rule allows for an operator to locate a road in a critical location. Notice that it does not say because it is less expensive. Safety might include factors such as road grade and alignment. An example of greater environmental risk might be a case where avoiding the critical location would require a much greater road length. So written plans for critical locations. We'll be talking about written plans later on in the presentation. But for now, just think that non-waivable and non-statutory written plans are required when roads are located on critical locations. The department is directed to review written plans on site with appropriate qualified professionals within 14 days of receiving a completed written plan. Appropriate professionals include ODF&W, DEQ, and geotechnical experts, to name a few. If the review does not happen within 14 days and there are no other associated waiting periods, the operation may continue as described by the written plan. Okay, critical location. Part of the detail for the written plan shall include a narrative describing why alternative routes are not feasible or would pose a greater environmental risk. Duplicate roads. Notifiers are required to investigate using existing roads before building new roads, which includes roads belonging to neighboring landowners. The requirement is to investigate and does not mean that you must use the existing roads, only to make use of existing stable and functioning roads where practical. When notifying for road construction, you will need to affirm that you have investigated these other options. (625-0320) is the rule set for water crossings. The current rule set is approximately 3/4 of a page long, whereas the new rule is 6 1/4 pages in length. Most of that length is added specificity, for example, listing required embedment depths for culverts. The rule is organized into design strategy for all types of water crossings, addressing both temporary and permanent crossings, fords, and self-monitoring inspections of all Type F and Type SSBT crossings every 5 years. So the next 20+ slides are going to be delving into these rules in depth. Examples of waters. Okay, so is that road a waters of the state? 0320 avoids the use of the term waters of the state. Instead, it lists out the applicable waters as shown here. The main difference to the current rule set is that it does not apply to underground waters nor the Pacific Ocean. So all of these examples of all these waters are listed in the rules and they are defined in the rule set. Water crossings. As stated earlier, this rule set addresses all water crossings. So operators must minimize excavation referring to the banks. Operators must minimize excavation referring to the banks near the stream crossing. Additionally, fill volume must be minimized, which is accomplished to keeping the fill height as low as needed and the width as narrow as possible. In cases where the fill depth exceeds 15 feet, the fill must be armored to prevent erosion of the fill slope. The depth of the fill is measured from the downstream edge of the road surface to the natural ground directly beneath it. Operators must also prevent erosion of the fill by stabilizing the slope and minimizing the water running over the fill. Channel erosion is limited by channel armoring or other energy dissipating measures. Another change to the rule set is the use of the peak flow. The current requirement to size structures is to use the 50-year peak flow in the calculations of the crossing structure. The new rules will utilize instead the 100-year peak flow. So in general, the 100-year peak flow is approximately 25% more than the 50-year peak flow. Culverts. Operators must ensure that stream diversion is not likely. Stream diversion is where waters from a stream are diverted out of the drainage they would normally flow into. The concern here is where will the stream water go if the stream crossing becomes plugged. Ideally, the water would flow over the fill and back into the same stream channel. The problem comes when the stream water flows down the road surface or the ditch line. In these cases, the water may travel for long distances, eroding much more material than if the fill itself failed. Another requirement is to plant disturbed stream banks with native woody shrubs or otherwise stabilize the stream banks. Hydrologic connectivity. So hydrologic connectivity is one of the new buzzwords and is heavily emphasized in the new rules. Hydrologic connectivity refers to all of the road surface and ditch line that drains into waters of the state. So the most common areas of connectivity are where? Near stream crossings. So in this picture, the red arrows show the length of ditch line that is connected to the stream crossing. You need to consider all of the ditch line from the last cross drain to be disconnected. Cross drains should be installed as close to the stream crossing as possible, while allowing sufficient filtering at the outlet to keep sediment out of the stream. Road surfaces may be connected as well. The segment of the road directly over the stream crossing is often a challenge to disconnect, as most engineers know out there. Okay, permanent channel spanning structures. Freeboard is the elevation difference between the water level and the lowest bridge element in order to allow passage of debris during large storms or flooding events. Freeboard was a recommendation in previous guidance with a recommendation of 3 feet of clearance above the calculated 50-year flow event. The new rule now requires a minimum of 3 feet of clearance from the calculated 100-year peak flow elevation. Permanent log bridges or wood bridges must be securely anchored on one end. This doesn't apply to wood-decked rail cars, just bridges with wood support elements. So all channel spanning structures. When gravel is used to surface a bridge, clean sorted gravel must be used, otherwise a geotextile lining or other barrier must be used. Bridge elements must not constrict the stream channel so that the water level rises more than 2 feet. Fish stream channel spanning structures. Permanent channel spanning structures in fish streams must have a low flow channel to allow sufficient depth for fish passage at low flows. Additionally, the structure's elements or supports may not constrict the clearly defined channel. Stream crossing culverts must be installed so that they do not cause bank or stream bed scouring. Many factors affect scour potential, such as culvert gradient and alignment. Operators may use armoring at the outlet to prevent scour. And the minimum size culvert for any live stream crossing is 18 inches. Fish stream culverts. Existing guidance basically describes a stream simulation approach. Now rule requires it whenever feasible. The general goal of stream simulation is to mimic the conditions of the stream so that a fish experiences similar conditions within the structure as in the stream channel. If you would like to learn more about stream simulation, there is a 646-page Forest Service guide available for your reading pleasure. Just Google Forest Service stream simulation, you'll find it. Fish stream culvert width. The rule set now prescribes minimum culvert widths for fish streams. Culverts placed at a very low slope of up to 1% are required to be at least as wide as the active channel width. These culverts can be difficult to install nearly flat and should be planned carefully. All other crossings for fish streams must be 1.2 times the active channel plus 2 feet. So here's an example. Given a 4-foot channel of active width, 48 inches, if it's a low gradient, culvert must be a minimum of 48 inches wide. Other gradients, you take the active channel width of 48 inches, multiply it by 1.2, which is now 58 inches, add 2 feet, which is another 24 inches, and your minimum culvert size is now 82 inches, or 6.8 feet. Just in case you didn't get that, here's another slide that explains it. So 0 or 1% gradient, at least as wide as the active channel width. All others, active channel width times 1.2 plus 2 feet. All right, so culvert slopes and alignments must mimic the existing stream channel or the expected stream channel in the case of a replacement. When a culvert length would exceed 150 feet long, a channel spanning structure should be used when site-specific factors allow to do so. The maximum water velocity within a culvert shall not exceed the velocity of the narrowest stream channel cross-section. Culverts placed in a fish stream must be embedded, which means placing the bottom of the culvert lower than the expected stream bed elevation. Round culverts need to be embedded a minimum of 30% and a maximum of 50%, while pipe arch culverts are to be embedded a minimum of 15% and a maximum of 30%. Percentages are based on the height of the culvert in relation to the natural stream bed. So culvert bed materials must be similar to the natural bed materials. Bed materials are those that are placed or deposited within the culvert. When considering what the natural stream channel bed material look like, make sure that you are looking above the influence of the existing crossing. They shall have a similar composition to natural bed materials that form the natural stream channels adjacent to the road crossing in the reference reach. Design the culvert to allow sufficient transported bed material to maintain the integrity of the stream bed over time. All right, fish stream and culvert embedment strategies. The goal of the culvert embedment strategy is for the area below the stream grade to be filled with stream bed materials that approximate those found in the stream. New crossings must have the materials manually placed within the culvert, while there is an allowance for natural accumulation when replacing existing crossings. When natural accumulation is planned, additional monitoring is required. Natural accumulation relies on upstream materials to move downstream and deposit in the portion of the culvert that is below the stream grade. In many stream crossing replacements, there are deposit of stream bed materials above the culvert, which are available to quickly move downstream. New crossings in general have fewer mobile stream bed materials available to move downstream quickly, hence placing the material in the new crossings. Culvert embedment timelines. Operators must state that they plan to use natural embedment in their written plan, as well as the conditions that allow it. There are additional requirements for both landowners and the state forester. Operators must check for embedment after the second winter. If it has not embedded, they must submit a new notification and manually place the material. The state forester is directed to inspect the culvert by December 30th of the second year to ensure that it is naturally embedded. So there's going to be a lot of communication between you guys and us. Fords. Specific requirements for fords have been added to the rule as well as a definition. A ford is a stream crossing where the vehicle's tires travel through the water. Fords may only be used during periods of low flows and installed in a dry stream bed. If installation is done when the stream is flowing, the flow must be diverted. In cases where the approaches need to be built up, they must not dam the floodplain. The crossing must be as perpendicular to the stream as possible and minimize the velocity through the crossing. Fords may not be wider than 16 feet and be fish passable when used in a fish stream. Temporary crossings must be designed to pass the flow expected during the period they are in use without ponding. They must be fish passable if used in type F streams. ODF and W in-water work periods have been added to the rules for temporary stream crossings. A process for extending the period outside the defined parameters requires consultation with ODF and ODF and W. In-water work periods vary by location throughout the state and can be found in the publication Oregon Guidelines for Timing of In-Water Work to Protect Fish and Wildlife. And I got a couple of copies of that up here if anybody wants to see them later on. In the case of non-fish streams, there are defined dates for crossing use, but these can also be modified based on weather and other considerations, again, in consultation with ODF and ODF and W. Temporary crossings must be able to pass the expected flow for the period they are in place. The 18-inch minimum culvert size still applies to these crossings. The crossing must be installed in a dry stream bed. Dewatering is required when there is stream flow. When removing the temporary crossing, operators must comply with the stream crossing vacation standards, which will be discussed later. All right. So operators must now include an erosion control plan within their written plans. All bare soil that may impact waters of the state must be seeded and mulched or other use for effective stabilization. Structures must be placed during the in-water work period and must be isolated from the work being done. Isolation means a temporary barrier is used to isolate the work area and reduce the amount of turbidity impact to the actively flowing stream. So still not much difference there when you're putting in new culverts and doing the stability issues. Monitoring. The final requirement in section 0320 requires that landowners visually inspect all type F and type SSBT culverts at least once every 5 years. The intention is to identify blockages and other issues that might impede fish. And if you see that as a blockage, you're definitely probably not in Western Oregon. Okay, so drainage priorities, hydrologic disconnection. 625-0330 addresses road drainage based on a priority system. When there is a conflict between the requirements, the lowest numbered section takes precedence, and the operator shall not implement the later numbered and conflicting section. So there's 6 priorities for this one. And if you've got a conflict with any of those 6, then the lowest numbered section takes precedence. So that would be the one that you would do first. Waste materials. All debris, sidecast, waste, and other excess materials associated with constructing, maintaining, or vacating roads must be placed in a stable location outside the RMA and where they will not enter into water of the state. If a stable location is used within the RMA, it cannot be placed any closer than 75 feet from a water of the state, and a written plan must be submitted that describes the site-specific measures to be used to prevent or minimize the entry of these materials into all typed waters. If RMA protection is not required, operators shall place waste materials a minimum of 75 feet from all waters of the state. Stabilization. Operators shall stabilize all potentially unstable and erodible material to avoid potential delivery of sediment to waters of the state as soon as practicable after completing the operation or prior to the start of the rainy season. Any effective means can be used as described in this slide. Sounds good to me. Of course, slash logs or other organic material shall not be incorporated into any fills, so still not much new there. Vacating forest roads and water crossings. The purpose of this rule is to ensure that when landowners choose to vacate roads under their control, the roads are left in a condition where road-related damage to waters of the state is unlikely. So some of the specifications for vacating roads are that landowners shall effectively block the road to prevent continued use by vehicular traffic and shall take all reasonable actions to leave the road in a condition where road-related damage to waters of the state is unlikely. This can be achieved through the use of outsloping the road, installing water bars, or otherwise storm-proof roads to leave them in a condition suitable to control erosion and maintain water movement within wetlands and natural drainages. All water crossings must be removed and the banks stabilized to prevent erosion into waters of the state. Okay, so I got no notes for this slide, just ooh and ah, take a look at the picture and read the descriptions. A lot of these new rules that you're hearing and listening to, they're not really new per se, they're just being written down and put into words. So a lot of the best management practices that you guys do out there are actually being written into the rules now. So that's why it's expanded from what I say, 3/4 of a page to 6 1/4 of a page now. Vacation project evaluation. So the landowner shall notify the state forester that a road or crossing is vacated. The state forester has 30 days to determine whether the road or crossing has been vacated and to notify the landowner in writing. If the state forester does not respond within 30 days, the road is presumed to be vacated. So when we're talking about state forester, the state forester in this case is usually the stewardship forester. So just give us a call and tell us that the road's been vacated, and we'll come out and take a look at it. Okay, construction in wetlands. So this is a new one. And for the next few slides, the term wetland will be used to describe significant wetlands, stream-associated wetlands, and any and all wetlands greater than 1/4 acres in size. So operators are to avoid or minimize all road and landing construction near or within wetlands. Where impacts are unavoidable, operators must first minimize impacts and then mitigate for them in the priority order options 1 through 4 of this rule. Okay, so what are the priority options? Priority option number 1, attempt to minimize road length when avoiding wetlands. Select the least environmentally damaging landing location, and road length. Pretty much what you guys do with the BMPs out there right now. Okay, priority number 2. When road or landing construction in a wetland cannot be avoided, the operator shall build a temporary road or landing that minimizes impacts by reducing the subgrade width, fill acreage, and spoil areas, and removes temporary fills or road sections upon the completion of the project. Priority number 3. When building a permanent road construction in a wetland, operators must mitigate impacts by reducing or eliminating impacts over time through preserving or maintaining areas, or replacing affected areas by creating new wetlands or enhancing existing wetlands. And priority number 4. Filling or draining more than 1/4 acre of a wetland requires the operator to replace by substitution or enhance the road or landing construction site for the lost wetland functions and values. The objective of successful replacement by substitution of lost wetland area is approximately on a 2-for-1 basis and of the same type and in the same general location. The objective of enhancing wetland function is to provide for an equivalent amount of function and values to replace that which was lost. Okay, written plans. How many of you had to do a written plan before? Better be a lot of hands going up there because we use them quite a bit. All right, so written plans are a communication tool designed to ensure the landowner and operator are aware of protected resources and or areas of critical locations that exist within the project area. It should be seen as an information exchange between the operator and the state forester to evaluate the chance of success for an operation. It is not an agreement between parties, nor can it be approved by the state forester, but rather used as a tool to review the impacts of an operation to the operational area. Chance for us to let you guys know that there are things out there that need to be protected. Okay, written plans for roads. So as most of you know, there are basically two basic types of written plans. Those required by statute and those required by rule. Statutory written plans have a 14-day public comment period which starts the day the written plan is received by the state. This comment period cannot be waived. Operations may commence when the state forester provide comments after the public comment period has closed, or 21 days after the written plan is received by the state if no comments are provided. So when you're starting your operations, plan accordingly. The other type of written plan is a non-statutory written plan, and it can be further broken into two groups. Those where the written plan requirement may be waived, and those where the requirement cannot be waived. So for the roads, most of the written plans required into Division 625 fall into the non-waivable variety. So for those of you that are going to be doing a lot of road construction, get to know those rules. Non-statutory, non-waivable written plans are required to be submitted. The state forester may provide comments to these types of plans, at which time the operation may commence. If the state forester does not provide comments to these types of plans, the operation may commence at any time after 14 calendar days following the date the written plan was received by the state. So written plans required for any aspect of an operation must contain a description of how the operation is planned to be conducted in sufficient detail to allow the state forester to evaluate and comment on the likelihood that the operation will comply with the Forest Practices Act or administrative rules. So nothing much new there. Same thing as the current rules require, except there's just a lot more detail that needs to be allowed now. So highlights to note: non-statutory, non-waivable written plans now are required for these types of activities. Any water crossing activity in type N streams. So there's a few new things that are added to the list of those written plans that are required. Current written plan requirements. A map showing the operational activity area must be submitted with the written plan. The printout supplied through the notification process does not qualify as a map for the written plan, so nothing new there. In addition to addressing the bullet points listed on this slide, written plans for road construction or reconstruction in Type F and Type SSBT streams have their own longer list of requirements that must be included in the plan. Has anybody seen those yet? No? Okay. Well, they can be found in 625-0100 sub 7, also on which is You guys all have one of these at your desk. It's on page 64 of the January 2024 newsprint edition of the Forest Practices Act. So if you want to check it out, go for it. And that looks like I am done. So hopefully you guys learned a few things there. If not, come chat with us afterwards. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Arden Gwynn, FRIA coordinator out of Salem. I'm going to talk a little bit about road condition assessment. So the road condition assessment is a new requirement for small forest landowners, and the purpose of the RCA is to ensure that roads used by forest practices activities and owned by small forest landowners comply with the standards set forth in the Forest Practices Act. There's a few objectives, three main objectives. First, to describe the road conditions that contribute to active or potential sediment delivery to waters of the state. Second, to document water crossing locations and determine the status of compliance with the FPA. And third, to identify potential fish passage barriers, abandoned roads, and roads with a perched fill that present a significant hazard to fish-bearing streams. So which roads need to be assessed? The assessment of all small forest landowner or forest road is encouraged, but only existing roads on the parcel where the harvest will take place is required. So small forest landowners that do not include roads, don't include roads on neighboring landowners' properties, and RCAs do not need to include skid trails. So when should the SFO submit an RCA? When a small forest landowner submits a notification for operation that includes timber harvest, an RCA must be submitted with that NOAP. Also, an RCA must be submitted if a small forest landowner will be applying for an SFISH program grant, which stands for Small Forest Land Investment in Stream Habitat. I'll be going over that in a few minutes. These are copies of some of the draft guide and RCA form. We are currently working to finalize a standardized form with a completion guide for small forest landowners. There, as mentioned before, there's new capacity with SFO foresters that can assist when completing RCAs if needed. So this is the SFISH program. This is a new grant program at ODF, Small Forest Land Investment in Stream Habitat. It's a grant program established by the legislature in 2022 to help qualified small forest landowners implement projects that improve fish habitat and mitigate risks to natural resources arising from forest roads. The program prioritizes projects with a high conservation value. Examples of high conservation value sites include sites located in areas of known chronic sedimentation, fish passage barriers, stream crossings that have diverted the stream channel or have a high diversion potential, areas where the road drainage system is not adequately disconnected from waters of the state, so those hydrologically connected areas, and then roads with a perched fill presenting significant hazard to fish streams. To be eligible for the SFISH program, the landowner must confirm that they meet the requirements of a small forest landowner, and they must inspect their forest roads and complete an RCA. Some examples of projects in the SFISH program include replacement of culverts or fords that no longer function or that don't meet the FPA design standards, abandoned road repairs that prevent sediment delivery to waters of the state or improve fish passage, and then remediation of roads with a perched fill that present hazard to fish streams. the SFISH process. So a small forest landowner will complete an RCA and then apply for a project evaluation. A site visit will be conducted to determine if the project meets the program eligibility. An eligible project is evaluated and ranked in consultation with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife based on its benefit to fish. The project is funded when it becomes high priority, and the program helps the SFO develop project details. The SFISH program will help the SFO find a project sponsor. So the project sponsor will help manage the project, including the project design and obtaining contractors and permits. Project sponsors will be encouraged for all projects and may be required for more complex ones. Project sponsors could be a consulting firm that provide multiple services required for successful completion. The SFISH coordinator has been reaching out to watershed councils, SWCD, soil water conservation districts, and tribal habitat programs to discuss strategies for partnering them with small forest land owners. Also some NGOs and state agencies to see if there's ways that for them to help small forest landowners implement these projects. Okay, so FRIA, the Forest Road Inventory and Assessment, this is the large landowner version of the RCAs. It is for non-small forest landowners, and it is the road inventory, project planning, and reporting process that is required of non-small forest landowners. The purpose of the FRIA is to reduce chronic and catastrophic sediment delivery to waters of the state and to ensure fish passage by identifying existing roads that are not meeting Forest Practices Act. Before I go into too many specifics, this is kind of a large timeline, so I wanted to kind of lay the land here. FRIA is a 20-year plan. So these first, yes, it's working, cool. These first 5 years will create these first 5 years, so 24 to 29, will create a comprehensive road network inventory. So the first 5 years will include this pre-inventory list, which will address those high conservation value sites, which is what I went over in the SFISH program. They're pretty much the same. And also during this calendar year, we will be setting up meetings with landowners to discuss the pre-inventory sites and consult with the FRIA process. After consulting, then landowners can begin projects on the ground, their pre-inventory projects, and annual reporting begins on projects starting in 2026. So the initial inventory, which is the full road network, will be due in 2029. This is also the year that the identified pre-inventory sites should be completed. And finally, with all FRIA projects completed 20 years from now, 2044. I also wanted to call out 2034. This is when ODF will report to the services about FRIA implementation. So to effectively report on road inventories, landowners must organize their lands into road management blocks, or RMBs. Road management blocks are defined in rule as geographically distinct ownership blocks for which a landowner is encouraged to conduct a FRIA. RMBs are left open for landowners to define at their discretion. However, I encourage collaborative planning as necessary with stewardship foresters or myself. RMBs are really important. They're essentially the unit of measurement and reporting for the FRIA. For each RMB, the FRIA process will involve those three components: the pre-inventory, initial inventory, and annual reporting and plan. These are the high conservation value sites for pre-inventory. They are due, again, January 1, 2025. Pre-inventory is an early opportunity for ODF and landowners to collaborate on planning and prioritizing, as well as RMB planning, as I just mentioned. Pre-inventory differs from the initial inventory in that the entire road network inventory is not yet due. This will look more like a list of projects. The 3 core documents I'll go over for initial inventory are not required for this process, although it is encouraged for standardization. So pre-inventory sites are those with high conservation value. So fish passage barriers, chronic sedimentation, stream diversions or potential to divert, known hydrologic connectivity, and other relevant criteria as discovered during consultation. Something else I want to mention here is that consideration for pre-inventory sites should be given to areas where log hauling will occur in the first 5 years, so between 2024 and 2029. So these are the 3 core documents I mentioned. Each road management block will have to have these 3 documents, and they will be updated annually as projects are implemented on the ground. So maps showing the road network, a work matrix, which can be a document or a table, and that will list actions necessary to bring roads into compliance with the Forest Practices Act. And that work matrix will also show prioritization of work. And then the FRIA plan is a plan describing how the landowner intends to bring the road network into compliance by 2044. The plan will also include specific actions to be addressed in that calendar year and a general description of how work will occur during the FRIA period. FRIA initial inventory, the full road network is due in January 29. All active, inactive, and known vacated and abandoned roads must be included in this initial inventory, along with a categorization of meeting, not meeting, abandoned, or vacated for each road segment. Water crossing culverts must be categorized as fully functioning, imminent risk, minimum risk, or undetermined. And so here's another way to look at it. In other words, this is the required information that must be included in the FRIA initial inventory. So road locations, lengths, type, so that's the inactive, active, vacated, and abandoned categories, and then the status, meeting or not meeting Forest Practices Act. Stream locations and classifications, all crossing locations, type of crossing, is it a culvert, is it a channel spanning structure, and then if it is a culvert, it needs to have the category of fully functioning, imminent risk, minimal risk, or undetermined. An assessment of the material, known or potential fish passes barriers, and date of installation if known. So this table is pulled from draft technical guidance. These are the specific FRIA metrics that must be reported on annually, and it's detailed in rule. So I'm not going to walk through all of these. It's essentially, the length of forest roads improved and still needing to be improved, vacated, fish passage barriers, and then a certification that landowner remains on track to complete their FRIA by 2044. Let's see. Project reporting. So what I wanted to call out, what I do want to call out here is there is a requirement to report on length of forest roads improved in compliance with 03301, the drainage rules. And I wanted to call this out because this, most of the time, it lands in road maintenance and you won't necessarily be notifying for this. So here's another way to visualize the FRIA annual reporting. So each of these core documents here will be updated per road management block. This table is pulled from draft guidance as well. And so work accomplished during the calendar year will be updated in all 3 core documents. Upcoming work scheduled will be shown in the matrix and the plan. Additional information discovered on the ground changes in prioritization, and then the certification, self-certification.
Okay, a lot of this presentation that I have is just more of an awareness thing, so let's get right to it. Notification operations. Significant updates are coming to Ferns. On November 16th, there will be Ferns training, both morning and afternoon virtual sessions. These will be split into large landowners and small forest landowners related to information. No need to register, just go to our Zoom links on our ODF website if you'd like to attend. There are no continuations of NOAPs allowed into next year. I'm sure a lot of you have already heard that. On December 1st of this year, Ferns will be open to submit notifications for next year. Notifiers can use the copy function within Ferns for those notifications that won't be completed by the end of this year. This copy function is a shortcut in creating new 2024 notifications. It is helpful to put the previous notification number into the notifier comments when you create a new one. Additionally, documents do not carry over with the copy function. Written plans from previous notifications that have already been reviewed only need to be resubmitted if there are changes due to new rules or new resources were found. And of course, these, if there are new written plans, these would require a 14-day waiting period. When a notification is submitted for next year, and the landowner is a SFO or small forest landowner, there is a new process within Ferns. When the box is selected stating harvest will be placed on a small forest landowner's property, the notifier will see this new box pop up. A completed road condition assessment must be uploaded to the document section of the notification. The road condition assessment form can be obtained by clicking the link shown here, which, I don't know if I can, it's that green link there. But the stewardship forester can help the landowner work through this process. There's also guidance available on filling this out that can be found on the ODF website. The notifier must report accomplishments of each activity notified by the end of the calendar year. This process will be through Ferns. For small forest landowners, the linear length of the RMA harvested under the minimum option must be reported within 90 days after the harvest is completed. Compliance monitoring. Division 678 was created to address this new rule. The purpose and goals of the compliance monitoring program is to assess rule compliance, did they follow the rule or not, report findings to the Board of Forestry, the Oregon Legislature, and the federal services, and to identify areas needing improvement. Also, it's important to increase public trust in the Forest Practices Act and rule implementation. Compliance monitoring is not inspections and enforcement. This is done by the stewardship foresters. Compliance monitoring is a separate process that looks at specific rules to determine rates of compliance. Outlined in the private forest accord are the rules that are to be prioritized by this new compliance monitoring program. These rules are water protection rules, the forest road construction and maintenance rules, harvesting on steep slopes, and other rules as directed by the Board of Forestry. This is a timeline on the implementation of the compliance monitoring. And basically in 2025, it's when the data begins collection. Adaptive Management Program. In the Private Forest Accord report, the authors outlined an adaptive management program to coordinate future changes to the Oregon Forest Practices Act. Using stakeholders' input, the program will use a science-driven process to analyze the need for any changes to the rules, policies, or training. answering the question, are the rules effective at protecting resources? The program's purpose is to apply the best available science to the Board of Forestry's decision-making, which includes measuring the effectiveness of the rules to meet the biological goals and objectives to benefit several fish and amphibian species. This is used to determine if forest practices meet the goals to protect natural resources. To do this, the Adaptive Management Program has two main components. The Adaptive Management Program Committee, which guides the overall policy and processes and advises the Board of Forestry, and the Independent Research and Science Team, which coordinates research in support of policy decisions. Habitat Conservation Plan. The new and revised rule and programs designed to demonstrate Oregon's ability to achieve the biological goals and objective of a habitat conservation plan for aquatic species on private forest land in Oregon. What is an HCP? It is a federal agency's planning document designed to accommodate economic development to the extent possible by authorizing the limited and unintentional take of listed species when it occurs incidental to the otherwise lawful activities. The plan is designed to not only help landowners in communities, but also to provide long-term benefits to species requirements as identified in the Endangered Species Act. An HCP is currently being developed by a private contracting firm that specializes in HCP development. In December of 2022, the Board of Forestry approved the Department of Forestry to submit a draft HCP to the services. ODF staff is currently working to fully develop the HCP document. The goals is to improve protection for listed aquatic and riparian dependent species on private forest land in Oregon, to provide regulatory assurance under the Endangered Species Act, and to provide legal protections under the ECA for landowners and operators performing covered work in the permit area. This HCP only covers aquatic species. There's no changes to wildlife rules, and protected bird species are not included in the take permit. The administration of the Forest Practices Act for birds will not change. Here's a list of the aquatic fish species covered in the HCP. All native trout and salmon, bull trout, mountain white ash fish, mountain white ash, smelt and green sturgeon. Amphibians covered within the HCP include 4 different types of salamander and the coastal tail frog. ODF is currently working with a contractor to develop the HCP with input from a steering committee. Steering committee members include representatives from the Private Forest Accord report authors, ODF staff, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Oregon DEQ, the National Marine Fisheries Service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. ODF administers the HCP through the Forest Practices Act and rules. ODF holds the incidental take permit on behalf of the Oregon private forest landowners and landowners through this regulatory assurance, and landowners receive regulatory assurance through the compliance with the Forest Practices Act. Enforcement. Here's some briefly some notable changes within the enforcement program. Civil penalty base calculations increased as well as the maximum penalty. Currently, the $5,000 maximum penalty will increase January 1st to $10,000. Rules establishes new definitions and parameters for significant violations and repeat violators. Financial assurances for repeat violators may be required. In other words, a violator may be required to post and maintain a bond or other financial assurance instruments through the active periods of the operation, including stopping and starting a later date, and the maximum value of the bond is $250,000. This concludes my presentation.